Listen and watch on your mobile devices. Just search DZRJ Radio Bandido. You are watching the multi-awarded Radio Bandido TV on channel 224 Sky Cable and TV Plus boxes. Simulcast on DZRJ 8:10 a.m. Informing, advising, and entertaining the Filipinos and OFWs around the world. Streaming live on www.facebook.com/DZRJ 8:10 a.m. or on YouTube, channel DZRJ 8:10 a.m. Radio Bandido.
The views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.
Hello, Philippines, and welcome to the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio and Radio Bandito TV. I'm Eric Lecain. Here on the Jam, we discuss the biggest stories going on around the world, news outside the Philippines, so you can stay informed about the world around you. Now, today, we'll be taking a look at a U.S. Palestinian student who may very well be thrown out of the country for protesting the war in Gaza in opposition to the Trump administration. Also, an update on that crazy tariff war, which seems to be spinning out of control. Also, we'll take a look back at the Japanese internment camps of the 1940s and how possible is it that that might return to America again? And where are we in this ceasefire agreement between Russia and the Ukraine? Seems like no one can trust anyone over there. Also, Starbucks gets sued because the tea is too hot. And don't pick up a wombat if you're in Australia. We will talk about how much they don't like it. But before we get to the world news, I felt I needed to talk about something that is on some of the minds of the people here in the Philippines. Now, usually during the week, I talk to many Filipinos around the country. This week, it was in Manila, and Bulacan, and Cavite, also Cebu, and Jinsan, and Cagayan de Oro, asking them what world news they were interested in, what they have heard about, and then I'll talk about it here on the show. Lately, it's been about the usual issues in the U.S. and the trade wars, or maybe the Ukraine or the Israeli war in Gaza. But this week, everyone had only one news story on their minds: the arrest of past President Duterte. Now, in general, I don't talk about the Philippine politics or local stories because we have so many wonderful shows here on DZRJ to discuss those stories. But somehow I thought, I guess this week it should be different. If you look at the AP Newswire or CNN or the BBC or Al Jazeera, even Bloomberg Financial, you will see the story about how a warrant issued by the ICC was carried out by Interpol against the former president of the Philippines. Now, I'm not going to tell you the story of what happened because, well, everybody already knows it. And believe me, everyone has an opinion on the matter. But the people I've spoken to, it's either a travesty of injustice or he's getting what he deserves. No real middle ground, just one extreme or the other. Now, for me, as I've said before, even if you're a foreigner who has lived here 15 years, as I have, we shouldn't really take a stand in Philippine political issues, but rather look at both sides equally. I mean, I met Duterte a few times, and he was very nice and cordial. He talked to me in English and answered questions, even took some selfies with me. And he was funny. He's a easy guy to like. Now, if you've been watching my show back during his presidency, you know I didn't always agree with his economic policies or his views on the U.S. or how he handled the war on drugs. But I do remember saying several times that my neighborhood at that time over there in 𝗪𝗏 had actually changed for the better during his presidency. All the people sleeping in the streets and the beggars, even those windshield cleaner guys at the stoplight, all had disappeared. They even put a makeshift police building there, which was great. But since his leaving office, you don't hear much about him, mostly just his daughter Sarah, the vice president. But this week, Duterte is back in the center of the Philippines in the international news as he was arrested for crimes against humanity and quickly removed from the Philippines in a Lear jet. It did seem a bit odd, didn't it, about the arrest? I mean, how they seemed to get him out of the country so fast. No court hearing or anything. I guess I don't really know the procedure for this kind of thing. Nor does anyone else I talk to. I mean, I'm sure they wanted to get him out as quickly as they could before the country had a chance to react. And now that he's gone, there has been a reaction. Just the other day, there were people protesting his speedy removal all over, many believing it was the current administration that let Interpol grab him and put him on a jet, that maybe he should be returned immediately. On the same token, I saw people holding up signs that said, "Finally, justice is served." So whether you're on one side of the river or the other, it seems obvious that the river is getting deeper and wider. I can't tell you which one is right, or if the near 80-year-old former president should or shouldn't have been snatched away and put on a Lear jet in the middle of the night and flown halfway around the world to be put in a detention center waiting a trial to be put on by people most of us have never even heard of. We can only hope that if they put him through a lengthy trial, that it will be a fair one. No matter which side you stand on, the people of the Philippines need to know that he was treated fairly and justly. Now, I know what some would say. Did he treat all those people in the drug war fairly and justly? Well, that's for a court to decide. But what's important is that no matter what happens in a cold, faraway country that most of us have never been to, that here in this country, it doesn't pull families and friends and coworkers apart. Some of the people I have spoken to this week, good people, good citizens, very passionate and very emotional about this subject, and are using the word hate a lot. I've been reading a lot on Facebook posts that are pretty harsh. And well, there's a lot of misinformation about what's been happening day to day. My suggestion on this is that if you ever have to say, "Wow, I can't believe that," then check with a major news site first to see if it's true. So all I can say is that I hope everyone can keep a good level head, because this process is probably going to last a while. And in the meantime, there's going to be a lot of speculation one way or the other. If I can make just one suggestion, if you have to blame someone, just do what they do in the U.S. and blame it all on Donald Trump. This is Eric Lecain on the World News Jam here in the beautiful Makati, Manila, talking about interesting stories going on around the world on DZRJ and Radio Bandito TV. I want to get over to a story with some, slight similarities. It's based around a Palestinian student named 𝗪ခြ𝗍𝗋. He's a 30-year-old graduate student at Columbia University. He lives in the student housing of Columbia and has a green card, making him a permanent resident of the United States. Now, he was part of the protests that we were talking about months ago here on the show, happening at Columbia University in New York, with students showing their disagreement with the treatment of the Palestinian people in Gaza. Of course, the multitudes of women and children and unarmed Palestinians killed by the Israeli military. Now, Mahmoud is of Palestinian descent. He grew up in Syria and is a citizen of Algiers, but he was on his way to being a U.S. citizen, seeing as he is married to his wife, who is a U.S. citizen and is 8 months pregnant. Now, Mahmoud grew up having firsthand experience of what it's like to be in a warring country. He actually refers to himself as a double refugee, a Palestinian refugee from Syria and a Syrian refugee from Lebanon, where he ended up during the Syrian civil war. He later worked for the British government in a foreign commonwealth and developed the Commonwealth offices, but eventually he was able to secure a student visa to the U.S. He's due to graduate in May of 2025. Now, he's married to his girlfriend of 7 years, who is a U.S. citizen and as well as a dentist. Being married to her has gotten him a green card and will lead to his eventual U.S. citizenship. Maybe. Because last Saturday, he was arrested. What he was exactly arrested for is still somewhat unclear, but he was arrested by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, as we call them there in the U.S., which usually is used for undocumented aliens in the U.S. or foreigners who have overstayed their visa. But this student was none of those. He was legally in the country. He had a green card and was married to an American citizen. But he was a Palestinian protesting the war in Gaza, which, you can do in the U.S. We have to remember that the current Trump administration is pro-Israel and has made statements in the past that if you are pro-Hamas, that is considered anti-Semitism. Now, what the protests in Colombia, what that was all about was students asking the Colombian officials to completely divest from Israel, to remove all connections between the school and the Israeli government, which they said was committing genocide in Gaza. Let me just say that the UN has agreed that many of the killings in Gaza are illegal against its laws on humanity. But Mahmoud was careful. He didn't want to get so caught up in the protest that he would get himself suspended for not following school guidelines. Now, he actually was suspended for his involvement in the anti-Israel and anti-Semitic activities. However, his suspension was retracted just a day later after evidence showed that he did indeed follow school policy. A lot of that had to do with social media posts that Mahmoud had nothing to do with. His protests were centered around the $14.8 billion endowment fund. He wanted Colombia to stop investing in companies that support the Israeli government, and dismantling of a university outpost in Tel Aviv, and end all collaborations with Israeli universities. But all these protests were happening as the Trump administration constantly commented about protests going on in Colombia, that they were against the policies of siding with Israelis. Trump even threatened to remove all government funding from Colombia if they didn't shut down those protests. Then Mahmoud got on the radar of the Trump and Israeli supporters. If we remember then, Trump came in office, he signed an executive order stating that student visas will be revoked if the student breaks any laws during anti-Israeli protests and will immediately be deported. And as I said, Trump has threatened to pull the $400 million endowment that the government funds to Columbia University. And then they said they will use AI to track down any student that deems as an agitator using their social media accounts, and they will revoke all visas indefinitely. The program is actually called Catch and Revoke. Well, as it turned out, Trump went ahead this week and cut all funding to the university, saying that they were allowing illegal anti-Israeli protests. Then the day after he cut that funding, ICE arrested Mohammed at his home while his pregnant wife was crying and screaming and filming the whole thing on her phone. The ICE officers told her at the time that if she didn't back away, that they would arrest her too. The ICE agents told her that they are revoking his student visa. And she said, but he's not on a student visa. He has a green card. The ICE agent looked at her and said, we will revoke that too. They refused to show a warrant. They refused to give their names. They cuffed Mahmoud, put him in an unmarked vehicle, and sped away. Now, all this happened in New York City, but the next day he was taken to New Jersey. Then he was taken to the state of Louisiana, a 4-hour plane ride, being held in a detention center there. Mahmoud has not been charged with crime and is not alleged to have been engaged in any activity that is legally prohibited to the United States residents. So far, they have not said he has done anything that warranted his arrest, nor nothing to warrant a deportation. Mahmoud's lawyers filed a motion that he not be removed from the U.S. while the court was assessing his case. Now, since then, the U.S. government has accused Mahmoud of activities aligned with Hamas. However, have not yet provided any evidence of this claim. They have said that Mahmoud distributed flyers with a Hamas logo. However, again, have not provided any proof. Mahmoud has stated to his lawyers that he felt like he was being kidnapped at the time of his arrest. His wife said it felt like a scene from a movie that I'd never signed up to watch. Turns out this arrest did not come from immigration, which oversees ICE. It came directly from the U.S. State Department. It's gotten so much media attention because it seems like it fell into the Trump campaign promise of revoking student visas from foreign students that don't align with his government's policies. Seems like at the time that they didn't realize this person was not on a student visa, but rather had a green card, but just arrested him anyway. Now, a green card basically says that you cannot be removed from the country unless you have committed a crime. However, Mahmoud has not been accused of a crime, only participating in a campus protest. But here's where the interesting part of the story begins. The Trump administration is relying on a rarely used provision of the U.S. immigration law. It says that the Secretary of State can say he has reasonable grounds to believe that your presence or activities in the United States would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States. In other words, that in order to combat anti-Semitism around the world, it would need to deport this one guy. This is actually a big deal because, America is supposed to be the land of free speech. So now it seems if a student speaks out, then government agents can come to his house in the middle of the night and take him. So if your viewpoint is different than, say, Donald Trump, then you can be jailed or removed from the country. But if your viewpoint is aligned with Trump, you can protest the opposition by attacking police officers in a coordinated uprising against the current government and found guilty by a jury of your peers and sentenced according to the federal law, and then freed from prison and considered a hero by the president. This is where we start to get into some unstable grounds. Mahmoud has specific rights as a green card holder. You can't just revoke his green card because you don't like what he said about the war going on the other side of the world. He gets a due process. He does have the right to have his case heard by a judge. The problem is the State Department wants to use a provision that has already been found to be unconstitutional because, whether you like it or not, you can't be punished for a political opinion that is in opposition to the current administration. And Mahmoud's opinion about the war, whether you like it or not, is not accurate. The Republicans, especially the MAGA people, have been complaining about their right to free speech as long as I can remember. But there is a slight difference between saying that a country is killing its people and should be stopped, and a, say, vaccine is killing its people and should be stopped. Now, I know we should always be entitled to our opinion, even if it's clearly wrong, except when our opinions are designed to hurt other people. Right now, Mahmoud's lawyers are trying to get him moved back to New York, where they are confident his case will be dismissed in New York, not Louisiana, very pro-Trump state. Protests for his release are planned all over the country in major cities such as Boston, Phoenix, Charlotte, Oklahoma, Miami, and Indianapolis. The Trump administration has already tried to remove Mahmoud from the country. However, they have been blocked by a federal judge. The reason? He's a permanent resident of the U.S. Now, another Colombian student has just been arrested for illegally protesting and overstaying. She is a Palestinian from the West Bank of Israel. The Trump administration is saying that Colombia is harboring people supporting terrorism and has demanded Colombia cede control of one of its academic departments. And yet another student from Colombia has also had their visa revoked for alleged activities supporting Hamas. Trump is basically declaring that they are not actually protesting the killings of thousands of Palestinians, but rather supporting a terrorist group. The big question coming up is, can this plan by the Trump administration work? And if it does, and a green card holding legal resident gets deported from the U.S., will Trump now have the precedents he needs to remove or jail anyone at any time for simply disagreeing with him? If you are currently a Filipino holding a green card, you might want to think about this. This is Eric Lecain on the World News Jam, talking about the most interesting stories going on around the world this week. Staying on a similar subject, do you know what the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 is? I have to admit, I was not born when that law was enacted. It states that during certain wartime, the U.S. can detain or deport citizens of an enemy nation. The president has the authority to target these immigrants without a hearing and base it only on the country where they were born. Even if they came here when they were 1 year old and have never been back to their country of birth, they can be deported back to that country if the U.S. is at war with that country. The idea is that even though you may have lived in the U.S. your whole life, but because you were born in another country, you most likely have allegiance to that country, even though nothing could be farther from the truth. So even if you have done nothing wrong, you are totally loyal to the U.S., you have worked hard, you've paid your taxes, you can be detained or removed because of where your mother was when you were born. The law has been enacted 3 times in history of the U.S., the War of 1812, World War I, and World War II. The best known time it was used was the internment camps that were made to hold the people of Japan back in the 1940s, during World War II. Over 100,000 Japanese, some second and third generation families, were picked up and moved to concentration camps. Before this, 12 zones along the Pacific coast were erected where the Japanese were put to prepare them to move to the camps. Then, 1942, they were put in camps where they would stay until the war was over and then be returned to Japan. Obviously, at that time, many of the Japanese had businesses, established work, and ties to the community. They realized they needed to sell their homes and businesses and cars, or just abandon them or let them be confiscated by the government. Because of that, many Americans took advantage of the situation to offer them extremely low prices for their assets, knowing that they would have to take their offer because they had no other choice. The camps were harsh, military barracks with coal-burning stoves. The people attempted to set up schools for the children and create farms to grow better food. Remember, they were there for years. Eventually, the U.S. Supreme Court stepped in and deemed these camps as unconstitutional. 30 years later, President Gerald Ford officially repealed the executive order and expressed regret for what the U.S. government did in the past. Then later, in 1988, Congress enacted the Civil Liberties Act, in which the U.S. awarded $20,000 to more than 80,000 Japanese Americans held in those camps, and Congress issued a formal apology for the Aliens Enemies Act. This is the same act that this past week President Trump has revived. He has claimed that a group of Venezuelans, the TDA, an organized crime group, is operating in the U.S. now. Trump had ordered his administration to designate the TDA as a foreign terrorist organization. By claiming this, he has now the ability to pick them up without a warrant. But the problem in doing this, you see, the U.S. is not currently at war with Venezuela. Venezuela has not threatened to invade the U.S. or vice versa. Even though if that's true, it somehow given Trump administration kind of a loophole to enact this 200-year-old law. Makes it easier for the administration to detain people for no reason at all. So even if they haven't committed a crime or done anything to warrant being picked up, they can just be picked up, just like in the 1940s. The government can do it anyway and detain and deport them without a legal challenge. Trump said in a speech that the U.S. is at war in his eyes, that migrants from certain countries are in the U.S. just to harm Americans, and that this is the best way to get them out. But it's not as simple as Trump thought it might be. A district judge has blocked Trump from deporting any more people under this executive order, saying that the U.S. has already set a precedent for doing something like this, and so you can't do it anymore. But then Pam Bondi, Trump's latest attorney general, has said that that judge is supporting terrorists and that the Justice Department is undeterred in its efforts to work with the White House, the Department of Homeland Security, and all other partners to stop this invasion from these terrorist states and make America safe again. Many believe Trump is simply testing the waters to see how far he can go in immigration, how far the courts will let him go. He's already tried to get the birthright citizenship from the Constitution removed from the books, but that's been struck down in the courts as well. But again, what he is trying to do is clearly only supposed to be in times of declared war, which the U.S. is not in a declared war. Yet he continues to make claims without evidence of a war with Venezuela. He also is using this reason to do something else. And that something, here we go, is tariffs. And this is the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio in Manila. I'm Eric Lecain. Let's update you on the on again, off again, on again, off again, on again tariffs. You have to be a little careful when talking about the tariff wars going on around the world, because it can be one thing at breakfast time and then something completely different by lunchtime. But before we get into specifics, let's look at the overall idea of what Trump is trying to do and how this might affect the Philippines at some point in the near future. So, of course, there is a tax on stuff coming into the U.S. from another country. Trump has said that tax is going to make the U.S. so rich that we won't even know how to spend all the money. But in reality, that tax is paid by who? The consumers who buy the products coming in from other countries. So, if that's true, why do it at all? One of the big reasons, and that has come out this week, is how Trump will justify his new tax cuts. Trump wants to cut taxes for the ultra wealthy. He has said it multiple times. He's not trying to hide it. But in order to cut taxes for himself and his friends, he needs to figure out where the money is going to be coming from. So, with these tariffs, the consumers or the poor people will basically pay for the rich people's tax cuts. Just read anyone's analyzation of the U.S. tariffs. They're all pretty much about the same. The problem is that other countries such as Canada, Mexico, Europe, and China are not just going to roll over. They are also putting tariffs on all U.S. products coming into their country. Now, Trump has said many times we don't need stuff from other countries. We can make everything we need right here in the U.S. So that's a good idea. Just make it all in America. However, it took decades to get all these supply lines around the world figured out. And even if you could reconfigure all of that, you still need to build the plants and the factories to make the stuff in the U.S. All the stuff that they're getting from other countries. Who's going to put up the money? Knowing that in 3+ years, there may just be a more sensible president in the White House and the world will just go back to the way it was before. Back when the U.S. stuck to its promises and trade deals. Trump is saying, we will take the trillions and trillions of dollars from tariffs and create jobs like never seen before. That tariffs are about making America rich again and make America great again. Well, some of that is true. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimates that the tariffs will bring about $1.3 trillion. But that's over the course of 10 years. But in the meantime, the latest tariffs are crushing the American economy. Have you seen the stock market sinking in real time every day? Trump's idea is to create an external revenue service, the ERS, and focus on that, thus doing away with the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS. Trump's Secretary of Commerce explained on Fox News, in a rather shocking statement, Trump's tariffs will raise so much money that Americans will no longer have to pay taxes. But here's the catch, or the reality in that. Americans pay $3 trillion a year in taxes. Imports cost, around $3 trillion a year. So in order to offset the taxes, you would need the tariffs to be 100% on everything in order to make up the $3 trillion. Also, who again is going to have to pay those tariffs? It's the American consumer. So if we do this, that McDonald's cheeseburger is going to cost double what it does today. So the Americans may pay no taxes, but everything will be so expensive that it won't even matter. Stores are not going to pay the taxes. They're just going to increase their price so much that it's better to take a plane to another country and bring back the items you want in a suitcase. Right now, Trump is flip-flopping on the tariffs from day to day. No one is exactly sure what's coming up on any given day. And because of this, the stock market took a little tumble at the beginning of the week and then another tumble. And then, it just fell off a cliff. Dropped like 10% in just a week. It had a slight rebound on Friday. Maybe 1%. Trump dropped a 25% tax on aluminum and steel imports for the whole world. So what do you think happened? Well, the European Union, they taxed the U.S. 25% on $28 billion worth of stuff, including beef and whiskey and Harley-Davidson motorcycles. So then what does Trump do? He threatened a 200% tariff on all alcohol products from the EU member states. Canada has also announced new tariffs worth $21 billion. Canada said they're going to tax electricity because of the U.S. 25%. So Trump said he would tax another 25% on top of the aluminum tax. Anyway, you see what I'm saying. These types of tariffs have been tried in the past and they just never work. All the worldwide tariff wars since the 1930s have all turned out that way. Both countries in these types of wars, both lose. Take a look at China. Obviously, they're going to buy less U.S. products. But because it's China, they don't necessarily need to buy those products because China doesn't really have labor laws and salaries like the U.S. They can make anything. Many have speculated the U.S. needs China more than China needs the U.S. as far as products are traded. And Trump tried this in his first term with the farming exports. Remember that? China. It was an extreme failure. The U.S. government ended up having to give the farmers subsidies, and 20% of those farmers ended up going bankrupt anyway. But of course, Trump must know that this is going to kill the U.S. economy. The question is, does he really care? And why should he? His tax cuts are mostly for billionaires, adding billions more to their bottom line. But the tariffs will cost the poor people around, $1,200 to $4,000 a year if Trump does exactly what he says. It will be the single largest transfer of wealth in U.S. history. And what about the world? What about countries that import huge amounts of their products from the outside of their country? How will these tariffs affect those countries that are not even directly involved in the tariff war? Countries like the Philippines. It's true the dollar may shrink against the peso, but the price of things imported? I don't know. What if Trump wanted to take back the Philippines? Wonder what the Philippines would say to that. Well, I can tell you what Canada has said, but I'm sure you can guess. Yes, this week, Trump again alluded to the fact that he wants Canada to be the 51st state of the United States. That wouldn't be beautiful if Canada was part of the U.S. according to Trump. But because of that statement that he made, a congressman from Rhode Island has proposed a new law in the United States. That law is called the No Invading Allies Act. Basically says that Congress will not fund any military incursions into allied nations for the purpose of annexing them. The actual wording is prohibit funds for the armed forces to engage in operations to invade or seize territory from Canada, the Republic of Panama, or the self-governing territory of Greenland. That would be all the nations that Trump currently wants to take over. So in the U.S. right now, Congress is making measures to stop the U.S. president from taking over countries that he likes. If you had told me about a Netflix movie with a storyline like this, I would have said you were crazy. That could never happen. This is Eric Lecain on the World News Jam right here on DZRJ Radio and Radio Bandito TV, talking about the biggest news stories going on around the world. All right. Let's move over to the war in Ukraine. Day 1,120, maybe? Right now, everyone is talking about a ceasefire agreement. But when you look at the war going on right now, looks like Russia's not slowing down at all. In fact, it looks like they are increasing the war effort. In Kursk, the fierce fighting continues. Just has like it's been for the last few years. Russia is saying it's surrounded the Ukrainian troops. And of course, the Ukrainians are saying that the Russians are lying. But it is true that Ukrainian troops are fending off both Russia and Northern Korean troops in Kursk, and are also looking at the possibility of a new attack in the northeast. The president of Ukraine is saying that Putin has no intention of a ceasefire. In fact, says that Putin is just doing the opposite. While everyone is talking ceasefire, there are several towns this week in which the Ukrainian troops have been forced to retreat due to gunfire. Several people have been injured, including children, in this week's push by the Russians. President Zelensky said, we talked about who would delay peace and slow everything down, and now we see it clearly. A ceasefire could have already happened, but Russia is doing everything to prevent it. End quote. He said that Russia wanted to achieve a stronger position before committing to a ceasefire. The more land Putin can acquire, the more he will bargain for, it seems. Even the French President Macron said that Putin is escalating the fighting and wants to get everything first and then start negotiating later. He said Russia does not give the impression it sincerely wants peace, and that Europe and the U.S. should pressure Russia now to accept the current deal. The Prime Minister of the UK spoke out in front of 29 leaders at the summit this past week that Putin is dragging his feet over a 30-day Ukraine ceasefire. He said Putin cannot just delay peace talks indefinitely. He was like, there has to be a time limit on how long Putin can hold out. He said military chiefs will meet in London next Thursday to put strong and robust plans in place to swing in behind a peace deal and guarantee Ukraine's future security. He said they have put forth new commitments on tightening sanctions on Putin, saying sooner or later he's going to have to come to the table and engage in some kind of serious discussions. So, this is the moment, he said. Let the guns fall silent. Let the barbaric attacks on Ukraine once and for all stop and agree to a ceasefire now. But Putin is not going to play very fairly. No surprise. The Kremlin said this week they will only agree to a ceasefire if Ukraine also agrees to abandon its aim of joining NATO and give up some territory to Russia. Of course, Russia knows Ukraine will never agree to that. That's why most allies are claiming Russia is just delaying. And also, why is he increasing the attacks instead of decreasing? Putin has no intention of a ceasefire. See, Zelensky is not so naive now. He's remembered in the past when they made deals with Putin only for Putin to wait until their guard was down and then break the deal. This time Zelensky is trying to be smarter, making sure that Putin will follow what he agrees to. This is why they keep saying the security measures must be in place before any agreement can be made. Because what if they make a ceasefire and then Russia just comes in with guns blazing? What will happen then? Is the U.S. propose the agreement going to stop them? We have to remember, this is just for 30 days, just a time to stop fighting so that the two sides can come together and discuss the possibility for peace. The problem is that many believe that Putin has no plans for peace. Putin wants to break down the European Union. He wants Trump to pull the U.S. out of NATO. He doesn't want a few pieces of Ukraine. He wants all of Ukraine. The problem is, for Putin, if the deal has security forces on the ground in Ukraine, then they will make sure any deal he signs, he will have to abide by. The UK Foreign Secretary said, right now the Russians have been put on the spot. The U.S. has a deal on the table. He said the proposal for a ceasefire is like a test. He can't simply say he's ready to end the war. Putin has to prove it. The secretary, who attended a meeting of the G7 foreign ministers in Canada last week, said the group of nations known as the Coalition of the Willing was determined to create the conditions that guarantee that Russia does not come back for more. Now, Putin this week said just that the ceasefire is the right idea, but there are questions we need to discuss. He said that we are in favor of the deal, but there are some nuances. Then Putin said something about the 𝗪ശ region, the one that we were talking about before, that the Russians have surrounded the Ukrainian troops and they needed to lay down their weapons. His words were, surrender or die. He went on to ask how the 30 days would be used. For Ukraine to mobilize, rearm, train people, or none of that. Then a question of how will it be controlled? Who will give the order to end the fighting? At what cost? Who decides who has broken any possible ceasefires over the 2,000 kilometers? All those questions need to meticulously work for both sides. Who polices it? This is all the stuff Putin asked. To which Zelensky said Putin is practicing to reject the ceasefire. He won't say no directly, but we know that he's not going to do it. Putin, of course, is afraid to tell the U.S. President Trump directly that he wants to continue this war, that he wants to kill Ukrainians. But the Russian leader has set so many preconditions that nothing will work out at all. So here we are, right back where we were before. The difference being that Ukraine is actually in a more vulnerable spot than it was before. The U.S. is playing cat and mouse with Zelensky, and Putin is saying one thing and doing another. How can peace ever be achieved that way? In reality, it cannot. The only way to stop a fight in the playground is for a teacher to come out and stop it. So before that teacher, well, that was the U.S., but that teacher is retired. So there needs to be another one to take her place. Otherwise, we will be talking about a ceasefire come next year. And really, it's time for the war to end already. This is the World News Jam on Radio Bandito TV, talking about stories going on around the world. I am Eric Lecain. I just wanted to touch on a story that I find so ironic. You know this company, Starbucks? They sell expensive coffee. They have 7 shops within 1 block of where I live. In fact, you can stand in one spot and see 3 of them. And they make that hot cup of coffee or tea, in my case. And that lid with the little hole that you can sip your coffee. But that first sip is always so scary, right? You don't exactly know how hot it is. You just tilt the cup up, waiting and waiting for... And then, ow, it's too hot. Then you burned your tongue and you have that feeling all day. Well, in California, this guy was picking up his hot cup of tea at the drive-thru of the Starbucks. There were 3 cups of tea in that tray when it was handed to the man in his car, but one of the lids was not all the way on the cup very well, and it toppled over, landing on the lap of the man. And this was the venti size. Anyway, he was burned badly. The problem was where he was burned. Right in the old manhood. He suffered 3rd-degree burns on his very important appendage. Now, since the incident, he has had 2 skin grafts on his stuff, but it has left him without the ability to have any friction there. And if he does do anything to create friction, it causes him so much pain. So he did what any American would do. He sued Starbucks because of the severe burns, disfigurement, and debilitating nerve damage. He has suffered physical pain, mental anguish, loss of enjoyment of life, humiliation, inconvenience, grief, disfigurement, physical impairment, anxiety, and of course, so much emotional distress. I'm just reading what the lawsuit was for. In any case, after the hearing of the case and the horrible suffering of this man, what he had to go through when it burned his manhood, the court found Starbucks was at fault for not properly securing the lid of the venti-sized cup, and for that, the man was awarded $50 million. Close to 3 billion pesos these days. Now, does that seem a little high? Well, the Starbucks people think so. In a statement, they said, "We sympathize with Mr. Garcia," that's the name of the man that burned his junk, "but we disagree with the jury's decision that we were at fault for this incident and believe the damages awarded to be excessive. We have always been committed to the highest safety standards in our stores, including the handling of hot drinks." But the man's lawyer said that no amount of money can undo the permanent catastrophic harm he has suffered. But this jury verdict is a critical step in the holding Starbucks accountable for the flagrant disregard for customer safety and the failure to accept responsibility. That his life has been changed forever. Now, the biggest piece of evidence in the trial was the video of the employee preparing the drink, and the moment it spilled in the man's lap, the argument was that the employee failed to completely secure one of the lids on the cups. And that is worth $50 million. I remember back in the 90s when that old lady sued McDonald's when she spilled her hot coffee in her lap. All she asked for was that McDonald's pay her medical bills, but they refused. So she sued them and won $2.7 million. Back in the 90s, that was a lot. Eventually, it was lowered, but it forced McDonald's to lower the temperature of their coffee. And this is Eric Lecain on the Jam. I think we got time for one more story. So let me ask you, What's the best way to get everyone in Australia to hate you all at the same time? Pick up a baby wombat and carry it over to your car while the baby's mother is chasing after you. So this American influencer named Samantha Jones was vacationing in Australia, making videos for her channel, which has like 100,000 followers. It seems she stopped her car to pick up a baby wombat on the side of the road. Obviously, the baby did not want to be picked up and was squirming and hissing while its mad mother was chasing them. She eventually let the wombat go as her and her friend were laughing. She posted it online for her followers, but it didn't have the reaction she thought it would. The video went super viral, mostly because people were so mad at her, many saying she should be arrested for animal cruelty. Eventually, the international media picked it up, and the video went everywhere in the world. Everyone saw it, including the Prime Minister of Australia, calling the incident an outrage. The Foreign Minister calling the video dreadful. The opposition leader in Australia saying it was a cruel act. An online petition was being signed calling for her visa to be revoked. So far, it got 30,000 signatures. In her defense, she said the baby was carefully held for 1 minute in total and then released back to her mom. They wandered back off into the bush together, completely unharmed. I don't ever capture wildlife that it will be harmed by doing so. Of course, this statement did not help matters very much. The Wombat Protection Society said it was shocked to see the mishandling of a wombat just for social media likes. The head of the World Animal Protection of Australia said to that baby, it must have seemed like a giant predator was picking it up and taking it away, all for cheap content. Supposedly, the American influencer got hundreds of death threats. So instead of waiting to be deported, or worse, she quietly got on a flight and left the country. So let this be a lesson. If you're in Australia, don't pick up a baby wombat. It may get you killed, not by the wombat. This is Eric Lecain on the World News Jam right here on DZRJ Radio and Radio Bandito TV. Thank you so much for joining us in our ongoing discussion of stories going on around the world. Please join us next week for more interesting news and updates. So until then, everybody here at DZRJ, be safe out there, and we will see you next week.
The views and comments of the hosts and guests are not necessarily those of the station.